amended codes comes extensively onerous B-BBEE recognition levels. Their scorecard compliance levels have been increased, and to date the transformation efforts under the aegis of the codes has been driven by business buy-in, and the public sector really only started applying the codes years after they became effective. And while the codes were initially accompanied by the backdrop of unparalleled economic growth, there is a concern that these amendments during such tough economic times will be retrogressive for business, for civil society and the economy as a whole. And I'm sensing that the momentum is starting to shift against them, unfortunately. Well, tonight is all about the sector-specific codes, and I think this is also where a big part of the challenge and the confusion and the problem lies. It's a great pleasure to welcome Stefan Sarkochet of the EU Chamber of Commerce back onto the show. It's been a while, Stefan. I hope you're keeping well.
I'm keeping well. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Hilton Johnson next to you, the CEO of Compliance Hub. Hilton, always good to see you.
Thank you, Michael.
And Lianne Levenstein, the rose amongst the thorns, has decided to join us again, the CEO of EconoServe. I think I said EconoBEE. It's EconoServe, Lianne.
No problem. Either way, it's perfect.
And on the line, we've got Graham Dorrington, Director of Dorrington and Jessup down in Cape Town. Graham, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.
Leanne, kick us off tonight. I mean, since the first phase of the Codes of Good Practice was released back in December 2004, there's been this widespread confusion in the market as to the status of sector transformation charters, also known as industry or sector charters, in relation to the codes and vice versa. Just set the scene for us here. What's the purpose of the sector codes, and why have different rules, one for the industries and one for everyone else?
Perfect. Let me take you back to the beginning. So as you mentioned, when the first set of legislation came out, it was the Act back in 2003-2004 time, and then the amended the Codes of Good Practice was gazetted in 2007, with the first set of industry-specific sector codes coming out in 2009. What basically is a sector code, or the purpose of the sector code, is to have different criteria where it is unique enough within a specific industry. The confusion that has arisen from this is since 2009, there's been a whole lot of different sector codes that have been gazetted. In 2012, when the amended Codes of Good Practice was gazetted, it basically amended the 2007 legislation but didn't yet address the sector codes. The sector codes at the moment, only tourism, MAC, meaning media, advertising and communication, and ICT has actually been updated. So we've got a situation where, as I said, back in 2009, when some other sector codes came through, like for example the forestry sector and the transport sector, has not yet been amended. So there's the strange situation where some companies are following an amended scorecard and others are still following the more lenient requirements of the old sector.
Now, Hilton, the Commissioner has got involved, and she actually said on the show on Monday that her take is that all the targets for all sector codes need to be at least as high as the Codes of Good Practice here. Now, it's radical economic transformation. That's the buzzword of the time. What will business do if it sees these targets as unachievable, if it thinks the DTI set the bar too high?
I think, Michael, this is the biggest fear that we're all going through at the moment, that this is potentially the tipping point against the BE codes. Because the minute companies start looking at this and saying that the fruit is too high and we can't reach it and I'm not going to bother doing it, then they move off and transformation stops. I was with a client today who took a judgment call and said 15 million rand in product discount or 15 million rand for a BE certificate, and the decision was made 15 million in product discount. So transformation in that company stops automatically. And if you look at the amount of verification companies a year ago to what they are today, it's probably a tenth of what there was a year ago, which means theoretically that's a tenth of the companies that are just not being verified anymore. And that's because the fruit is just becoming so difficult. Legislation is so difficult for companies to comply with. There is such confusion in the marketplace. The rules are made today and changed tomorrow. You cannot strategize between old revised codes, current codes in one sector, and potential sector codes in another. Where do you go? How do you plan 3 or 4 different targets within a company over a 1-year period of time? Will there be a transition phase? Will it kick in immediately?
Well, business wants certainty. We know that, and I was chatting to Tim off air about the fact that there's no certainty in the UK at the moment because of Brexit, so not a lot of businesses are taking place. So it's not unique to South Africa. Stefan, what are your members experiencing with the codes, and what sort of feeling is there out there with regards to wanting to comply versus pushing back?
I think what sets the scene, Michael, for the listeners who don't know who we are, the European Chamber is a federation of bilateral chambers of commerce. We represent EU business established in South Africa and Southern Africa, so we represent 2,000 companies on the ground. That's close to 80% of South Africa's FDI. We're also South Africa's largest trading partner if you take the 28 member states. So we are a loud speaker, if you want to call it that. We have a presence on the ground, and the underlying tone of our attitude towards black empowerment is very much that the EU Chamber supports continued economic transformation in South Africa through the BBBEE. I think we've demonstrated that over the last 20 years. We've invested 2,000 billion rand over the last 20 years. We've complied with the previous codes ever since 2004. We've made all the efforts in that direction, and we are in a situation now where the gut feeling is, and this is not something of my invention, it's a result of a business climate survey that we carried out in 2015 and 16, which gives us our indicators in terms of what the attitude of EU business is towards FDI. And the three key worries, the worry factors, including the new sector codes, are in order of priority: rising prices, I think it goes without saying, and the volatility of the rand, but that's a recurrent theme over the years. Number two is government corruption, and here, don't shoot the messenger, I'm just reporting from the 2,000 companies that we surveyed, 250 of which responded. And number three, very prominently so, in the list of about 15 worry factors or KPIs, is lack of skilled labor and BBBEE legislation and cost of implementation. So there's certainly a big worry factor out there. If you take it one step back, we're sitting in a situation where there are, at present, if you go to parliamentarymonitoringgroup.co.za, we're sitting in a situation where there are 40 bills currently sitting, for 95% of them, in fact, in progress, so 2 or 3 of them sitting on the President's desk. So there is great concern voiced by the EU business community here, and we've demonstrated that, or we issued a statement. So we have the survey that talks about the worry factors. We went as far as to issue a statement last week. It came out, I think, in Business Day, on BBBEE and the way forward. So as much as we support the economic transformation, as much as we heeded the national budget speech and the will for economic transformation, especially in view of our own experience, where the growth of the middle class and greater economic inclusiveness has been key for social stability in Europe, we're heeding that, but we're saying that although the growing emphasis on ownership overrides basically the other aspects of BBBEE, over supply chain or skills development, it's actually compromising existing and prospective investors' ability to continue and to expand their operations in SA. Specifically, I'm talking about procurement rules of very recently applying to SOE tenders, state-owned enterprises, not to name them. Eskom has made a point of demanding.
But 51% ownership is required in terms of procurement regulation.
Exactly.
Now, Graham, I want to bring you in here because quite clearly there is a willingness from the EU Chamber's members, from what Stefan is saying, to participate, but it does sound like it's become fairly capricious, even arbitrary and onerous in terms of the way that the targets have been shifted over time and the way it's being employed. Do you get the sense that momentum is ebbing away from the voluntary sector codes?
Michael, I think just to take a step back to what you said earlier, I think the crucial thing for business is certainty. And I've been involved with BBEE since its rollout in 2003. And probably the most difficult challenge we've had in dealing with clients has been trying to understand where the program's going and how it's going to be interpreted, and trying to get certainty on that interpretation. So if you take the sector codes at the moment, you've got one of the big problems with the companies that we work with, for example, in the financial sector or the construction sector, is that they've got draft charters hanging over them, but they are using different charters. So in financial sector, they're using the old financial sector charter. In construction, they're using the generic charter. And all of these targets are significantly different to what they had previously faced and what they will be facing in the future. So if you take something like construction, that new charter should be gazetted, we're told, fairly soon. What that actually means in the BBEE world is very difficult to know, because often these things are expected to be gazetted soon, and then they take a year to roll out. But what you have is you then have companies working with a draft charter, and at the same time working the actual scorecard, they're measured on the generic charter. And these can have significantly different targets, which cost a lot of money. So on the one hand, you've got guys that complying with a current target, meeting that target, and then the charter gets gazetted, and they suddenly find that the targets that they've been complying with are no longer applicable to this new charter, and a whole lot of money's gone down the drain, and time and effort, and I just see it as a waste of opportunity. And I think that's one of the big frustrations, is that there's a huge, I think, very poor communication on any certain charters that are coming out and how they're going to be applied.
And so that's so important.
Last thing I'll just say on that is on the ICT charter, for example, when it came in, it was applied retrospectively immediately. And it's impossible for companies to comply with that.
Well, I mean, surely there must be an agreed spirit that this transformation journey is not the destination in and of itself. It is a journey, and interests, be they private or public, must give themselves time to get there. And if you look at the construction sector, Lianne, I mean, 4 of the 7 listed construction groups, and these groups are well known for their skills across numerous sectors, be it rail, airport, oil and gas, manufacturing globally, well renowned, and these are the groups that signed that voluntary settlement agreement with the government for rapid transformation, 1.5 billion in a fund over there. They made losses. I mean, for the last period, if we're looking at that, 4 of them made losses in the recent reporting period. The other 3 hardly shot the lights out. So the economic times are tough. Is it the correct time to A, be wielding a big stick, and B, be raising the bar to levels that are going to be dissuading rather than encouraging private interests?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the views that I've always had is, instead of penalizing a company who, as you say, in that case isn't making a lot of money, isn't profitable, they still need to spend money. So instead of penalizing them on elements like ownership, skills development, and enterprise and supplier development, I feel companies who have done well should have actually been promoted by one level as opposed to being downgraded by one level. It's just very demotivating when you do all of this hard work, you spend 100 million rand, for example, on skills development, and you end up being non-compliant because you weren't able to achieve a target on procurement, for example, which is driven by your own suppliers. Your own suppliers who are in the exact same boat with this difficulty. Regarding, and just bringing it back to the sector codes, what I feel should have happened with all of those sector codes, to avoid this confusing situation, to avoid EMEs following, for example, the transport codes, not being allowed to use an affidavit and making a complete mess of the different industries and different sector codes, is to have repealed every single one, like what happened with the construction sector as well as the chartered accountancy, and introduce, firstly, if necessary, and I don't think that they are necessary, but introduce when necessary and when they're actually ready. The situation that you have at the moment is many sectors, many companies are trying to fall within that sector because they still want to make use of the more lenient points level table, the lack of a priority element, just to name a few.
Well, it is a cost, so business will obviously look for the least cost route and option. The reversion back to ownership above things like enterprise and supply development and skills development is interesting for me, Hilton, because whenever I speak to businesses, we had Barlow World on the show earlier on, they're doing fantastic work through their supply chain, building black-owned businesses to go and stand on their own 2 feet. Now they're going to be penalized because of the ownership requirements. It does seem strange that we went back to that when ownership was one of the big critiques of the old BEE. A deal would be done, it would benefit a few elite, there was a trust set up. Could you actually trace who the beneficiaries of that trust were? Well, probably not half the time. Why did we take that step back?
I think it's all going around this radical transformation, and then radical transformation has become a preconceived idea, and it's a statement that is being bandished about without any actual facts behind it. And that is the problem. So we want to see change, and we're going to institute legislation around it without identifying the practical realities. I mean, we were talking about it coming in. A company in the ICT sector that's under 50 million cannot be a level 1. There aren't enough points. So why put it in legislation? It's ridiculous. And I think, Michael, the problem that all companies have is the set of rules have been thrown at us. These are the rules. Nobody's doing anything about changing the rules. So live with them, make adjustments, and try and bear with them, or face the music from the EU where companies are going to leave the country. That's the reality.
Stefan, is that the reality? I mean, how are your members going to respond to this at the end of the day?
Look, we have, business is very creative, and I want to go back to the fact that business is bottom line driven, and we mustn't lose perspective of the fact that the companies that are established here have their head offices for the most part in London or Berlin or Paris, and decisions are made at head office level. So whatever constraints, whatever costs are related to whatever set of regulations or in the regulatory framework in SA affects them from a distance. So as much as we are all pro economic transformation and adhering as much as possible to the policy framework to do business and make money, we're here to make a return on investment. We have shareholders. We are listed companies for the most part. So it's really a bottom line issue to begin with. When it comes to the B-BBEE, to which we've adhered, and we're continuing to try to empower and make that transformation happen, if the rules, in particular that ownership pillar that we're talking about, if that 51% ownership doesn't work for us because we're listed or our governance doesn't allow for it, we are creative, as I said, and we're looking for alternatives. So the next items on the list of discussion with the DTI are in fact very pointed. I think an important thing is that we engage also robustly with Commission Thuli of the B-BBEE Commission, and one of our questions last week was, well, you say once empowered, not always empowered, what is the DTI's target? When is it going to change? When are they going to have achieved their economic transformation? We'd like some clarity on that. And we're working on alternatives and solutions to the problem. So we're offering ideas along the lines of why not place more emphasis on labor intensity, as an example, in the scorecard, as opposed to ownership. There are situations here, we all know about this, there are situations here where you can take a black South African, a black Indian guy, and perhaps a white South African guy, for example, for that matter, who between the three of them will secure a level 1 on their scorecard and import and distribute consumer goods from China, as opposed to somebody who's attempting to manufacturing in South Africa. So we're promoting the idea of placing more emphasis on labor intensity. We're promoting the idea of the fact that if the rules doesn't work because we have a set of exceptions at the moment, more than applying the rule, where I'm talking about equity equivalence for certain American companies, I'm talking about equity equivalence initiatives that we ourselves are trying to work on with the Department of Transport. All of this is becoming a set of exceptions. So we're saying if there's so many exceptions, then surely the rule is wrong.
Well, surely the rule is wrong. Absolutely. Graham, just a concluding thought. You've got about 30 seconds. Sorry about that.
Michael, I think the main thing is certainty. I think that every sector is different and businesses are different. Some of them are able to meet the target, but I agree with what you said. There are a lot of companies that we're working with that won't be able to meet the target, and they're just going to abandon their program. And I think that what we really need is alternatives, and we need certainty.
Alternatives and certainty, and I couldn't agree with what Lianne said as well. More the fact that we should rather just scrap all of those sector codes and have one set of rules, and hopefully the right rules, as Stefan said, hopefully with not so many exceptions that the rule becomes a bit ridiculous. Well, there you have it for the Studio BEE panels this week. Tomorrow night I'll bring you an edited recording of the debate that we're going to be having in Sandton, which should be just as spicy. Thanks to all my guests tonight: Stefan Sakashay of the EU Chamber of Commerce, Hilton Johnson, CEO of Compliance Hub, Graham Dorrington down in Cape Town, Director of Dorrington and Jessup, and Lianne Levenstein, CEO of EconoBEE. From me, down in Cape Town, Director of Dorrington.